Hello again, everyone. Tom Nagorski in the Cipher Brief virtual studio. Good to have you with us today for this conversation in the aftermath of the elections in Germany, which, of course, are always consequential, but we're taking some time to talk about them today because of their consequences well beyond Germany's borders. Friedrich Merz, as most of you probably know, his Christian Democratic Alliance has won with 29% of the vote. He now has to do the dirty work of getting a coalition together. And notably, his party and he himself have vowed to continue support for Ukraine and to make what would be, I think it's safe to say, but we'll talk about it with our guest, a historic break from the United States. Delighted to be joined today by Liana Fix, who, among many other titles and accolades, is the Senior Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Great to have you with us, Liana. I know it's a busy day for you. I was struck by one comment in particular that Mr. Merz made in the aftermath of his victory, or his party's victory. He said that his absolute priority, quoting here, would be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that we can achieve real independence from the United States step by step. That real independence from Washington struck me anyway as a kind of astonishing thing to hear from a German leader. I guess it's a sign of our times. How did it strike you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Friedrich Merz is not your center left or leftist politicians who has always been critical of US hegemony or US imperialism, right? I mean, you have these anti-American
Right.
um, feelings in Germany too. He is very much someone who was born in 1955, who grew up with Germany's West integration, transatlantic relationship, NATO. Those are the main pillars that his socialization as a politician consists of. So for him to say that, it's a huge step. And that what makes it so remarkable, also because traditionally German politicians have always used a strong partnership with the United States to balance against French leadership claims. No one really wanted France to take on this leadership role in Europe, not the Poles nor the Germans. And so the partnership with the US was always important for that. But it also tells you something about how not necessarily Donald Trump's election, but the U-turn on Russia policy that the Trump administration seems to have done has really shaken German politics more than just the election result. Because so far there was always the assumption we can work with Donald Trump. German
Mhm.
politicians and European politicians can make deals, something is going to work out. Now there is a real feeling that because of the unpredictability, because of the U-turn on Russia, Europe needs to stand up for itself. And such a moment of clarity, insecurity, but also willingness to act is rare for Europe.
Yeah, and actually, just one more question on what he said and your point about Donald Trump and Russia. Um, Many leaders, not just in Europe, actually, since Mr. Trump's election, seem to have been, and of course, it's different in different parts of the world, but to be looking for an accommodation, right? Some are flattering him, some are looking for deals and so forth. There was none of that yesterday, was there?
No, he has backtracked a little bit because
Uh-huh.
afterwards someone must have shown him the congratulatory note from Donald Trump, who was quite positive about Friedrich Merz. So there was some relief in Berlin that Donald Trump is not following in the footsteps of J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, implicitly advocating for the radical far-right alternative for Germany, but welcoming the conservatives, which
Mhm.
are the firewall against the radical right-wing alternative for Germany. So since then, he has backtracked a little bit. He has said there needs to be a working relationship with the United States, but it's clear that he pursues a two-track approach now. On the one hand, work with the United States. On the other hand, as he said, step by step building up European defense capabilities. And that's the most important part. It's not only about strengthening Europe in NATO, but it's about building up European defense capabilities which can stand on their own outside of NATO or in a NATO minus format without the United States.
Right. And on that point, this conversation, of course, was already underway last week with a meeting that the EU had, and I guess it's a conversation in almost every European or at least Western European capital right now. And this is a big question, but how prepared do you think Germany is to make that kind of break with the United States, even if it is, as you say, and as he said, a step-by-step approach?
There is a strong tendency in the German public to see the United States as the good guys, as the protector of Germany's security. And so this adjustment to see the United States in a more transactional relationship will take time. But at the same time, the majority of Germans support a stronger German army, support stronger European defense efforts. The most important part of that is the money, though, right? I mean, how do you get to that point? And you can't get to the point without your public supporting you spending money on that. And there, the crucial term in the German context is the debt brake, the German self-imposed debt brake, which makes Germany one of the few low debt countries in Europe and actually globally, which gives Germany some fiscal flexibility if the debt brake is reformed or eliminated to invest in defense for
Hmm.
Germany and for the European Union. And if that money is untapped, which a majority of Germans also support, then we can see real progress on the German level and on the European level towards investments into European defense.
And just to be clear, because I'm not sure I'm clear, I'm not sure our audience will be, the debt, it's a bit like the debt ceiling in this country, except here we always blow right through the debt ceiling, right? And I gather in Germany it's not so simple, right?
Yeah, so it's basically part of the German constitution. A two-third majority in the German parliament has written this into the constitution under Angela Merkel in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. So there have been some, workarounds with special budgets and so on,
Mhm.
but basically the debt brake limits Germany's defense spending to 0.35% of GDP. And at the same time, you also have debt ceilings on the European level, which limits European countries. And so all these ceilings make it difficult to just get out the credit card and say, let's buy those tanks, let's buy those strategic enablers, let's buy those airlift capabilities that we need.
Hmm. And related to this, of course, is the German economy, which right now is in a sputtering state. Would you say?
Well, it's probably in its worst state since 1945. It's the
Hmm.
third consecutive year of a recession in Germany, which has never been the case so far.
Hmm.
Germany is one of the slowest growing economies in the European Union, so the sick man of Europe again. Merz wants to reinvigorate the economy, but one of the big structural problems is that the German economy has been so reliant on exports. Now, in a world of tariffs and in a world of Chinese overcapacity, dumping everything from electric vehicles to more um, modern machinery tools on markets with high subsidies from the Chinese states, it's just incredibly difficult to compete for an export-oriented country like Germany is. So it will have to reorient its economy towards other sources of growth, and that's the huge challenge that Merz is facing.
Recognizing excellence in national security. The Cipher Brief Honors Dinner celebrates those who've made a real difference in protecting our nation. It's an unforgettable evening with top leaders in the field. Join us in honoring these remarkable contributions. Reserve your seat now at cipherbriefhonors.com.
I wanted to. You referenced the attitudes towards Russia in your first answer, Liana. I saw a poll that was released on Sunday after the election that among voters, 65% said they were worried that Germany is helpless against President Trump and President Putin of Russia. Uh, Unpack that a little for us. Helpless is a big word.
Yeah, helpless is a big word. And I think in the German debate, one also has to be careful not to place the United States on the same equivalent level as Russia and
Of
China. This
course.
is something that Germans do very quickly, right? They very quickly talk about strong men in the US and China and Russia, and I always say, well, look, even a Donald Trump that is hostile to Europe or Germany is still someone who's very different from Xi Jinping and from Vladimir Putin. But this feeling of helplessness basically comes from a realization that to have a role in international affairs, you need a military basis. And Germany, which has always thought about itself as, a pacifist civilian country, is only coming to the realization that just being with your values on the right side of history doesn't help you. if you want your values to be worth anything, you need to support those values with hard military power. And that's an entirely new lesson for Germany post 1945. And the German public is embarrassed by the state of the German Bundeswehr, of the German army. It is embarrassed by the fact that even if Europe wanted to become more independent from the United States, it could not do that without accommodating or appeasing Russia and China.
Now, we haven't really gotten into, and in the time that remains, I can ask you about what all this means for Ukraine. I remember, and of course you will too, in the early days of the war, Chancellor Scholz talked about, I think, and forgive my pronunciation, the Zeitenwende that was going to come, the big change in terms of Germany's approach and the unity and all that. And here we are, 3 years later, and Germany's been criticized along with some other European countries for not doing enough. What does, in your view, Mr. Merz's election, how do you think that's being received in Kyiv and in Ukraine?
I think it's perceived with relief because Olaf Scholz has increasingly been perceived as someone who wants to have it both ways, right? On the one hand, support Ukraine. On the other hand, not support Ukraine too much, right, to prevent escalation. He has presented himself as the chancellor of peace in the German election campaign. So he really has not followed through with his announcement of a German Zeitenwende. But now the election of Donald Trump, or better to say, the radical change in Donald Trump's approach towards Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, what Secretary of Defense Hegseth said at the Ukraine contact group meeting, that is a second Zeitenwende. And this one is much more difficult to ignore because now you do not only have an aggressor in Russia, but you also have an aggressor and you are without a protector. And in this understanding of the situation, Merz is very clear that Ukraine is an asset to Europe, that Ukraine is the one front line that is defending against Russia if Russia becomes a threat to Europe. And he was open to delivering long-range German Taurus missiles to Ukraine. He is very clear on saying that Ukraine must win this war. So for Ukraine, it's certainly good news that Friedrich Merz will be the next chancellor.
Yeah. Now, last question then, because we'd be remiss to have this whole conversation about the vote and not mention the AfD party, the right-wing party, which, as you mentioned, Elon Musk supported. J.D. Vance, safe to say, he gave them more time than anybody else in his visit to Germany recently. And they came in second. It means they're not going to get into the coalition, right? But what should we across the Atlantic take from their performance, even if they don't wind up being in the government?
So the AfD is triumphant when it comes to the election result. They are also triumphant because they feel that this is an international movement that is supporting them from the United States, right-wing parties from Europe. And there is a concern in Germany that if this government doesn't get it right, especially on migration, on the economy, but also in security, this is the last election where the firewall can still hold. And in the next elections, the AfD could be too big to form a firewall against the AfD. So that's obviously a very sort of apocalyptic view, but it's not necessarily far-fetched. And that's what makes Friedrich Merz really a historic chancellor. The stakes for his chancellorship are incredibly high. He always wanted to have a place in the history books. He wants to be alongside Adenauer, Angela Merkel, Helmut Kohl, but he doesn't have the 16 years of Angela Merkel because he's much older than she is. So he will have to move fast. The historical circumstances give him the opportunity to be a bold leader, both domestically and in foreign affairs. But to do so, he really has to halve the votes of the AfD until the next elections, and he needs to coalition partner that helps him on that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it there. Leona Fix, great to have you with us again on this busy, busy day. Leona Fix, Senior Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.